Now, the ANC is in damage control mode as it faces an uphill battle to restore public confidence. That's following the latest series of scandals involving PPE contracts. Now the party's Integrity Committee is investigating whether their own members were involved in the unlawful handling and handing out of those contracts. Questions also being raised about the committee's true intentions and its power to hold members to account. Let's unpack the story now. Sanusha Naidu is Senior Research Associate with the Institute for Global Dialogue. She joins us now via our Skype line. She's in Cape Town. Good morning, Sanusha. Thanks very much for your time. Let's in fact start on that very issue around the Integrity Committee and whether it has any real power to effect change within the party and to insist that those who are behind PPE tenders and any irregularities are actually held to account.
Good morning, Michelle. I think it was quite telling this weekend. I think the NEC meeting that happened where the Integrity Committee or Commission, whatever the title is in the latter term, kind of gave a very scathing report and said that it doesn't really have the kind of space or the kind of maneuverability that it should have within the ANC, and it was quite scathing around some of the fact that the reports are not being tabled, or they're not being requested on time, or that the relevant information are coming through. Some of the recommendations are not being enacted upon. So they kind of came out guns blazing this weekend at the NEC meeting, suggesting that as much as they are trying to do whatever they need to do in terms of upholding the integrity of the party, that they're not being assisted, so to speak. But I think it goes beyond that. I think the challenge here is really around the fact that for a long time, that internal dynamic of integrity within the party has been in a deficit stranglehold. It has been in a kind of compromised position because of the way in which the party has broken down within the context of political infighting, slate politics, and of course factionalism. All of that now reaching a very, very disturbing, if not a final kind of disintegration of where is the party going? Does it still have does it still have the kind of place within the context of where it wants to be? And of course, what does this all mean? So I think the challenge here is really around whether they're going to take this moment, which is, I think, I wouldn't say it's the final moment, but it's definitely a decisive moment for them to think about.
Yeah, many of the issues that we're discussing today are not new. You talk about the internal dynamic of integrity within the party. It just sort of hits home a lot harder now that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and yet COVID-19 funds. I mean, when the president first announced that relief package of 500 billion rand, that was the first question that came to mind. How are we going to account for each and every rand and cent? And we now know that there has been irregular expenditure relating to COVID-19 fund. It's not new, but it just hits a lot harder because we are in the middle of a pandemic. People's lives are literally at stake.
Absolutely, Michelle. And I think you're quite right, but it shouldn't just be hitting home now because of the fact that there's a pandemic and there's still a kind of ruthlessness to what is happening with regard to how the funds are being mismanaged, but also it's like a final sprint, let me get as much as I can. But the problem here is that it should have been hitting home a long time ago. It should have been the fact that people's lives were being basically discarded and disregarded for what? To make a buck. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the inner challenge of the party. That if you're not going to basically, find your inner healing sanctum, your ability of being humane, then this is a real challenge for the party. Whether you call yourself the more reformed bloc, or whether you are the unreformed bloc, or whatever you want to call it in the party, slate politics, factionalism, there is a serious internal dilemma of where this is all going.
I mean, we saw some of what you're saying. If we think back to the VBS Mutual Bank scandal and those officials in Limpopo whose bank accounts showed that they had received a certain amount of funds for investing into VBS Mutual Bank, those officials we now know, I mean, we spoke to Enoch Gurungwada on this channel as well, and he was very clear that no charges have been laid against them, and so it's unfair towards those individuals for them to be kept out of government, and they've been reinstated in their positions. What does that say about the party and how it deals with these allegations of corruption and how it very regularly sacrifices on the altar of integrity, putting back these members in their positions and not looking at how South Africans feel about how it's being dealt with in the party?
I think a complete disrespect for the South African citizenship, for the electorate, for people who have essentially been loyal to the party, who have continually voted for the party, even the people that don't vote. Just the fact of the matter is that if you think you can get away with just continually camouflaging what is a serious internal crisis of trust and respect for yourself, but also for people in the citizenry. And I think that is just very, very shameful in terms of that. I think what needs to be done is you just need 3 words. You need to say, I'm sorry, and start healing yourself, start moving towards this point of saying, I want to now show that I'm the kind of party that has the value, has the credentials, has the principles that I always claim to have. And the kind of trust that you want to create within society as a kind of social contract. But unfortunately, if you're going to continue to disregard and disrespect society, then society is going to come out and continually not have trust in you. So I think that, for me, is the question of what is your mandate as a party that's supposed to govern, and the question of what is your governability.
Sanusha, let me ask you this. Where does the NPA come into these very clear issues of corruption and mismanagement of public funds? I mean, in the past couple of weeks, we've seen the gazetting now of the fact that the state capture inquiry's information can now be shared with this special branch of the NPA, the investigative directorate. It seemed like something that was quite obvious, and yet it took a gazetting for that to now be in place and for that sharing of information to happen. If there is this clear mismanagement of public funds, we know that it leads to a very real loss of life, people living in appalling conditions, a lack of service delivery. Should the NPA playing more of a role in terms of going in there and saying, here we have it on paper, this is the amount of money we had when it comes to the cost of funerals, 74 million rand was spent on these 3 funerals, we paid almost 500,000 rand for serviettes alone. This is public funds, this is an NPA matter. What's your take on that issue?
It's quite a tricky one, Michelle, because I think that one of the things that we have to start thinking about much more coherently, and perhaps think that our institutions need to actually be more decisive as well. But the problem here is that even the institutions are compromised. Even the NPA is compromised, because there's this internal fight happening, not just about whether you do your job or whether you carry out your mandate, whether there's that you can actually implement the kind of action you are talking about in terms of taking the kind of legal criminal procedure forward, but it's also about the fact that the bureaucracy is compromised in South Africa. I mean, I find it interesting that you have to gazette more things around the NPA, around the special SIU unit facility that was announced by the president, because at the end of the day, these are things that should be already in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Sanusha Naidu, we're out of time. Let's leave it there. So much to talk about when we reflect on this moment that the governing party is in, especially as we count down to elections. Thanks very much for your time. Sanusha is Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Global Dialogue.